Hey, you just tuned into Random Radio. Welcome to another episode of Just Ask, the podcast where you ask the questions and we give you the answers. Now, I'm your host, Nicholas John Random, and we are once again live at the Stimulus Cafe and Coffee House in beautiful Durango, Colorado. And today's podcast should be a pretty fun one. So, we're going to get out of the serious and sci fi and weird and history ones for a second here, and we're going to hop right into something a little more fun and a little more entertaining. Today's podcast is going to be all about comic books. Well, specifically about one comic book superhero. Now, our question today comes from Eric over in Louisiana. Eric says he's a huge fan of the Green Lantern. But ever since that movie came out in the 2000s with Ryan Reynolds as the Green Lantern, it seems like he hasn't seen anything more with the Green Lantern. And, they made a Justice League movie and they did all this kind of stuff, and new superheroes are coming out of the woodwork. He wants to know, what's the deal? They made a Justice League movie and they didn't include the Green Lantern, and he was a huge part of the Justice League. What's going on with Green Lantern? Do I know anything about the subject? And will we ever see another Green Lantern movie? Well, I would absolutely love to answer this question. The reason I picked this question out is because I grew up with comic books. I'm a super nerd, guys. I grew up with comic books, and I know a lot of friends who are comic book artists and equally as nerdy as I am. So I know quite a lot about the subject of comic books and superheroes, and I see all the movies. All the movies that come out, I see. So Green Lantern was one of my favorite comic book characters growing up, because Green Lantern wasn't just a regular superhero. He wasn't just like Batman, he puts on, a rich guy puts on cape and he's got all these gadgets and stuff like that, and he fights crime like a detective. No, Green Lantern was, his superpower is willpower and imagination, which is super cool, and he's gifted that power from space aliens. So, and he flies around in space and does space adventures all the time. So as a kid, this was super cool. It wasn't just straightforward, I'm Batman, or I'm Superman, or I'm the Flash, or any of that kind of stuff. It was all sorts of this crazy space adventure, willpower, like hardcore, interesting comic books. So where do we begin? Let's see. How do we start this one? So Green Lantern. So if those of you who don't know anything about the Green Lantern, well, this is a weird one for you to listen to if you don't really know anything about comic books or the Green Lantern. But the Green Lantern is a comic book character that has been around a long time. It is originally created in 1940. That's how old this comic is. It was created by a guy named Martin Odell, and the original Green Lantern was a guy named Alan Scott. Now, Alan Scott, that Green Lantern, was a completely different kind of Green Lantern. So there was like a 20-year reign where he was essentially a Batman kind of a character. He had a magical ring and it gave him powers and stuff like that, but he was very cheesy, and he was a crime fighter. He went around and fought regular crime fighting guys like bank robbers and kidnappers, and it was pretty straightforward. He had a few cheesy things that could stop him. Like it was the 40s in comics, guys. So the color yellow would stop him sometimes. He couldn't do anything with wood. Wood could stop him. It was really cheesy and silly, and he had a really crazy cheesy costume. He was very Batman-like. A lot of the superheroes made in the 40s were that was the idea, is they were cheesy. They were just cops that dressed up, is what it looked like pretty much in the comics. So in 1959, they reinvented the whole character for the Silver Age of comics, and the whole concept of the Green Lantern was reinvented. All of a sudden you had a whole new backstory with the aliens and the Green Lantern Corps, and it was way more interesting. The original origin story for the Green Lantern in the 40s was pretty cheesy. It was something like, there was a guy, this Alan Scott guy. He was in a train accident, and he finds this magical lantern that has this magical fire in it, and the fire talks to him, and it says, hey, you need to forge this ring, and if you forge this ring, I'll give you superpowers. And then all of a sudden he has superpowers and he becomes a crime fighter. It was kind of cheesy. They went back, and made a bunch of different addendums to the story, but that was basically the story, and it was really kind of cheesy. The story now, the backstory for the Green Lantern now, is essentially there's a Green Lantern Corps, which is very similar to like a police force or a galactic army. They're called the Peacekeepers of the Universe. In the whole world, there's a bunch of these different sectors, and each little sector is designated with one Green Lantern. One of these guys in a green suit with a green ring who has green powers. Now, these guys are essentially cops for that sector. They go around and stop all the bad guys. They're designated these abilities from these ancient beings called the Guardians. Not the Guardians of the Galaxy, different Guardians. They're these little tiny guys with big blue brain heads, and they're just they're the Guardians. Now these guys are basically the city council of the Green Lantern Corps, and their job is to tell everybody what to do. But the point is, essentially, every little sector has its own Green Lantern. Now, a Green Lantern is whoever they believe in that sector. Doesn't matter what kind of species they are, whatever. The rings will seek out whoever is worthy to hold that ring. Whoever they think has the strongest willpower and goodness of heart, basically. It's one of those kind of things, the chosen ones or whatever. The rings will seek out those people. When a Green Lantern dies, that ring will go off of his finger and seek out the next Green Lantern, and it'll look for the next person who's worthy to be the Green Lantern. So whenever they reinvented the story in 1959 from the old story, they reinvented him with a Green Lantern character called Hal Jordan. Now, this is the one we saw in that movie in 2011 that Ryan Reynolds played. So his story is essentially Hal Jordan was an experimental pilot and, had some tragedy in his life, blah, 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 blah. But ultimately, he was a good guy. He was just he was kind of a wild card character or whatever. But the original Green Lantern for that sector is this alien who dies, who crashes on Earth in his spaceship, and his ring floats up and goes and seeks out the next candidate. And the next candidate it finds is Hal Jordan. So Hal Jordan puts on the ring, and then he goes to the Green Lantern Corps, and he goes through the whole process, and he becomes the new Green Lantern. And he's the Green Lantern for a long time. Now, after Hal Jordan, now remember, Hal Jordan was in 59. So after Hal Jordan, we have a few other Green Lanterns. We have Guy Gardner, we have John Stewart, Kyle Rayner. Then there's a few other ones, Simon Baz. There's a lady Green Lantern, Jessica Cruz. There's even, I think they even made there's like a teen lantern at some point in time. Also, Ben 10 from the cartoons is basically a ripoff of Green Lantern. I'm not exactly sure how they got away with that, but I'm sure somebody paid somebody a bunch of money in DC and let them do that. But Ben 10, the Alien Force, Ben 10 Alien Force or whatever, the cartoon, my little nephew used to watch this show all the time, is essentially just Green Lantern without the rings and costumes and stuff. But so there's been a few Green Lanterns. The most prominent of them are Hal Jordan, John Stewart, and Kyle Rayner. John Stewart being, in my personal opinion, the best Green Lantern. But everybody's got their own thing. Doesn't matter. Those are all the human Green Lanterns. Now, here's the thing. When it comes to cinema, what's the deal with the Green Lantern? We got all these movies. You got Batman movies galore. You got Spider-Man movies galore. You got all these X-Men movies. And, DC owns, a bunch of different superheroes. We got the Flash, and we have Superman and all that kind of stuff. Shazam, and they did make a Justice League movie. They got Aquaman. Aquaman was a super, super cheesy character in the comic books, and they made him into an awesome Jason Momoa badass dude for Aquaman movies. I mean, the movie itself was kind of weird because most of it was CGI underwater, but Jason Momoa, even though he doesn't look anything like the comic book character, is amazing. Now, in 2011, they did make a Green Lantern movie, and it is notorious for being a Hollywood flop. and lots of the stars have even gone back to make fun of it and poke fun of it. But I'm going to be non-biased about this movie. First thing is, superhero movies are always big money makers because there's tons and tons and tons of comic book fans out there. You're definitely going to pull in, comic book fans, and you're also going to pull in young people. When you're making comic book movies, the idea is usually to make a comic book movie that's cool enough and awesome enough and close enough to the comic book that the comic book fans want to watch it, but also a little family friendly so that you can get the kid money. Because I can tell you, I used to work in movies, and kids movies make more money than any other kind of movie. So if you can get some of that family friendly kid movie, then you are making a lot of money on that movie. Now, was Green Lantern in 2011 a flop? Yes and no. So Hollywood has this really silly idea of what a flop is, which is if it doesn't get in the top billing at the box office. But there are tons and tons and tons of movies that are released all the time. So if you're not winning the box office, it doesn't necessarily mean that your movie is terrible. It just means that you didn't win the box office. Green Lantern did terrible at the box office. It was not a good movie according to reviews from the box office. I can tell you what people don't realize is over time it built up quite a following, and believe it or not, on a lot of streaming services, the 2011 Green Lantern is a very popular movie. Netflix still has it as one of the top viewed movies on Netflix. The movie itself, let's talk about that movie itself. So you have Ryan Reynolds starring as Hal Jordan, the main character. You have Blake Lively as his love interest. Now you've got Peter Skarsgård as the bad guy. You've also got Mark Strong as the good/bad guy. He plays Sinestro, which is, if you know anything about the Green Lantern scenario, he starts as a good guy, ends up being a bad guy. This is the movie that Ryan Reynolds met his wife, Blake Lively, on. The movie itself, people call it a bad movie, but I'm going to talk about it. So the movie itself wasn't terrible. I think there were a few key mistakes on the movie that probably caused it to be a flop. Let's start with Peter Skarsgård. Great actor. I like this guy. He's a really good actor. Wrong choice for this movie. Terrible, terrible, terrible choice. Because the way they set this movie up, Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, and Peter Skarsgård are all supposed to be the same exact age in this movie. They're all supposed to be like people who hung around each other as they were growing up from teenagers. That is so silly. And it's extremely silly when you actually watch the movie and you look at the makeup job they did on Peter Skarsgård, because I've seen him in movies where he is at this time. This is 2011. This was 10, 11 years ago. So at this time, he was in movies where he could have looked as young as Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively. Now, Blake Lively was young and beautiful, and so was Ryan Reynolds at that time. So, he was always going to look a little bit older. He also has the widow's peak and things like that. He was always going to look a little bit older than him, but you could have made him look around their ages. But the makeup job they did on Peter Skarsgård took his widow's peak way, way, way back, gave him weird thinning hair, gave him like a weird hunch and old clothes and stuff like that, and they made him look like he's 20 years older, and he is older than them, but they made him look like in the movie he looks like he's 20 years older than them, but he's talking to them as if they all grew up together and they're all the same age. So big mistake there. It was a really weird casting and acting job there, and again, nothing against the actor. Peter Skarsgård is a wonderful actor, but I just think he was the wrong choice for that character, Hector, in the movie. Biggest problem for the movie in general was the tone. Now, most comic books have been around for a really, really long time. So there's always the original guy that's the superhero, and then now, because time has passed, they keep changing, they keep passing the torch to new people to take up the mantle, so to speak, of these superheroes. So like, what do I mean by that? Originally, the Green Lantern is Hal Jordan, and then later it's Guy Gardner, and then later it's John Stewart, and then later it's Kai Rayner. But, traditionally, when you're making a Batman movie, you have Bruce Wayne. He's your character. So they reinvented the Green Lantern in the 50s and its character was Hal Jordan. So they wanted to use Hal Jordan. He is who about 50% of people think of who know the Green Lantern when they think of Green Lantern. They think of Hal Jordan. So I get that. You wanted to go with Hal Jordan. But here's the problem. When it comes to adapting comic books into movies, I can tell you from what I've seen so many of these movies, and I can tell you what usually works and what doesn't. The best way to do it is usually to make it more serious. A prime example is Aquaman. Aquaman was super cheesy and super funny and whatever in the comic books, but when you wanted to make him serious, when you wanted people to take him serious, you had to make him badass. You had to make Aquaman a badass. That's why they hired Jason Momoa, because that dude is ripped and he looks serious and he's got like crazy scar on his eyebrow and like looks gruff and rough and serious, and he's got a dark, there's the awesomeness and the funniness and the humor and stuff, but it's a little dark. There's the darkness too. And that is what works for superhero movies. If you go too cheesy and funny and family friendly, the comic book nerds hate it and they just want to throw it out the window. And that's the problem whenever they went with Ryan Reynolds. Ryan Reynolds is a great actor. He's quite funny. Perfect one, like made for the role of Deadpool. That is him to a T, and perfect, hilarious in those movies. Great superhero as far as Deadpool goes. But and for Hal Jordan, he does a good job as Hal Jordan, as that character. This is the thing though. Hal Jordan, along with like Kyle Rayner and some of those other Green Lanterns, those were the jovial, like boyish, wild card, but like blonde hair and smiley face white guy. No offense, but those were the cheesy, funny Green Lanterns that were too lighthearted. It was too lighthearted, too whitewashed. You know what I mean? It's not what people wanted to see. If you were going to make a Green Lantern movie, you needed to make it more serious. And if you're going to make a Green Lantern movie serious, in my personal opinion, you had to skip Hal Jordan. And you got to go right for John Stewart. Since the 50s, he's the third Green Lantern to have a Green Lantern ring. And he is always been my favorite Green Lantern. Now, I grew up around a lot of African-American friends and comic book artists. And first off, most people don't realize this. In the DC universe, he was only the second black superhero ever to appear in the comics. He showed up in the 70s, and he was awesome and BA. Like, he was really, really cool. I mean, you had superheroes out there that in the whole superhero world, Marvel or DC or whatever you want to call it, but they were always like super cheesy back then. I mean, who did you have? You had you had the Falcon, who was basically a sidekick to Captain America. You had Luke Cage, who they've made a really cool Luke Cage TV show now, and he's more awesome now. But when those comic books were written, Luke Cage was a pretty racist comic book character. He was essentially, it was just making fun of black people, essentially. It was really bad. He had a big giant afro, and it was really bad. But John Stewart, the Black Green Lantern, was awesome. He was like hardcore, and he was dark. That was the thing about him that was cool, was he was a dark character. He was very serious. There was always serious stuff going on with his character and his challenges and stuff. You know, they made a couple versions of the Justice League over the years, cartoons and comic books and things like that. He was always my favorite character out of the whole crew. He was just, you could tell he was just a strong character. Like, it was just good. So if you wanted to make a Green Lantern movie, he was the guy you needed to go to. You didn't need the funny, smiley, blonde hair, blue eyed white guy, laughing around, having a good time while there's serious stuff going on. That's not it's too cheesy. It's too silly. And you didn't need silly when you're making like Guardians of the Galaxies, great, hilarious, funny movies. And the reason they work is because you have the silly, funny character, but then you have all the serious side characters that back him up with the serious backstories. It doesn't work when the main character, your only main character of the film, is just the smiley white guy with the blonde hair and blue eyes and laughing around and having a good time joking around while there's all this serious stuff going on. It just doesn't work. And DC is supposed to be a little darker than Marvel. That was their whole, that was their whole hook when I was growing up. So I think that was the biggest flaw. The biggest flaw was that they used Hal Jordan. Now, like I said, to give Ryan Reynolds credit, he did a good job, and he played that character. That is the character of Hal Jordan, and he did a good job playing him. It was just the movie itself was written to Hal Jordan. It should have been written to Jon Stewart. It would have made a much more interesting story. Everybody in the movie themselves do a pretty darn good job. Like I said, Peter Skarsgård does a great job, even though his makeup and look is terrible and doesn't fit the movie in any way, shape, or form. Blake Lively does a pretty good job. There's all sorts of people in this movie. Angela Bassett's in this movie, as like a little side character. She plays Amanda Waller, which most people don't catch. That's Amanda Waller. People might recognize that name from Suicide Squad, because she's the main bad guy in Suicide Squad. And they gave her a little hint. They threw her in this Green Lantern movie. And most people don't even notice she's in there. Even though Angela Bassett, who is an amazing actress, is in this movie playing her. Tim Robbins is in this movie playing Peter Skarsgård's dad. And that's crazy. And I gotta be honest, out of all the actors in the movie, his acting was kind of the worst. And I liked Tim Robbins. Some of his stuff when I was growing up was really, really good. But I don't think he does a great job in this movie. I think he was just kind of phoning it in a little bit. Mark Strong plays Sinestro, and Mark Strong is a great, great actor, and he's so good at playing that character you love to hate. And he's got the look. They got Sinestro's look down with Mark Strong. Like, he looked perfect. Like, literally straight from the comic books. He looked exactly like what you imagine a live version of him would look like. Perfect. And he did a phenomenal job. He did a great, great job as that character. So the movie itself, all the actors did a pretty darn good job. The effects, people have given the effects crap, because they did a CGI suit on Ryan Reynolds. I can tell you the suit itself actually looked pretty good. Even the powers that he has looks pretty good. The mask that they give him looks really cheesy. They gave him a CGI mask, and because they wanted it to be able to fade away. And it looked really, really cheesy because they don't know how to do CGI eyes very well. And when they put the mask on him, what they should have done is cut out his eye holes so that you could see his real eyes behind those eyes. Instead, they CGI'd his eyes. And so it just looks really, really cheesy. But the suit itself looks alive and powerful and looks really, really cool. And I actually liked the suit. Like I said, it was just the mask that looked really silly. But again, that's another reason why you should have went with Jon Stewart as the Green Lantern character for your Green Lantern movie, because Jon Stewart was such a BA, such a badass, that he's the only Green Lantern that never wore a mask. He was just like, people are going to know who I am. And that's it. I am the Green Lantern. There you go. Why do I need a mask? And that was great. I loved that in the comic books. It was so cool. He was so awesome that he never wore a mask, But let's talk about, so they made a Justice League movie. They made all these lead up movies. You had the Batman movies, Dawn of Justice, and you bring in Wonder Woman, and you bring in and Superman, Man of Steel, and stuff like that. I got to be honest, I loved them. I thought Man of Steel and Henry Cavill and everybody did a great job in those movies. I thought he played a fantastic Superman. He's also a really, really cool guy. Wonder Woman, great and fantastic. She did a great job as Wonder Woman. Again, doesn't look a whole lot like the comic book character, but she did a good job. Now, Ben Affleck as Bruce Wayne. Now, a lot of people are not Ben Affleck fans. But here's the deal. Ben Affleck is just an actor. He's just been around a long, long time acting. And just like anybody who's been in the same industry for a long time, it's a slow process if you're not great when you start and learning how to become good. He wasn't a great actor when he started out. I got to be honest. He was not a great actor. He was trying to act for much of his young career. But he became a better actor over years. And I actually think he does a good job as older Bruce Wayne. Not as like the young Bruce Wayne that like is just starting out as Batman, like Christian Bale in Batman Begins. I thought that was great. I thought he did a great job. But that's Batman starting out. I think if we tried to watch a movie that was set up like Batman Begins with Ben Affleck as the Batman, nobody would have watched it and nobody would have taken it seriously. It would have been bad. But Ben Affleck's getting older, and in in the movies leading up to the Justice League movie, Dawn of Justice, and those movies, I think you're able to take him more seriously because he looks like older Batman. He looks like older Bruce Wayne, like Bruce Wayne who's been doing this job now for years and years and years. And that's kind of how they set him up. They give little hints, in the backgrounds, little Easter eggs and stuff of the fact that he's been doing this a long time. And he pulls it off. He pulls older Batman off, like an older Batman, because he doesn't have to be as crazy physical as younger Batman would have to be. I know that sounds silly, but it does. It works. So I thought he did a good job. Like I said, then you got Aquaman, you got the Flash, you have these lead up, you have these guys coming in, and they did good jobs. And I think all that was wonderful. But then everybody's wondering, everybody who grew up either reading the comic books of Justice League or watching, they did some great cartoons when I was growing up of the Justice League. Everybody who grew up with that stuff is like, okay, Green Lantern was a huge, huge part of the Justice League. How come there's no Green Lantern in the Justice League movie? Now, the main reason is, again, because of that 2011 Ryan Reynolds movie. Studios, when it comes to studios, money is what talks. And they thought the Green Lantern, because the Green Lantern wasn't successful at the box office for them, that the character must be flawed. It's not that the character was flawed, it's just that you had one movie that didn't do well. That happens. It's okay. Sometimes you need to reboot some scenarios. So now there's two versions of the Justice League movie. So Zack Snyder was making the Justice League movie, and then his daughter passed away, and he dropped out of the movie post-production. So the whole movie was made, and he dropped out to deal with, that terrible tragedy in his family. And they got Joss Whedon to come in and film a couple extra scenes and finish it up and listen to all the studio execs tell him what to do. Well, studio execs are terrible, and if you don't fight them, they will just look at numbers and tell you what to cut and tell you what to keep, having no regard for the actual movie or story whatsoever. And that's kind of what happened. So they looked at Zack Snyder's movie, and they were like, nope, this has to go, this has to go, this has to go. It's way too long. We got to cut this, this, and this, and this. And what you ended up with is they cut out the main bad guy of the movie. So when they released the movie, the bad guy scenario doesn't, you have this awesome lead up with all these characters coming in and forming a group to fight this bad guy. And they used the bad guy's sidekick essentially as the main bad guy instead of Darkseid, who was supposed to be the bad guy. And it didn't work. It was like, okay, that was anticlimactic because they wanted to shorten the movie down. And they also cut out a few things. Now, you do see little glimpses of lanterns, Green Lantern guys floating around. There are little glimpses, so people are like, okay, so they're clearly part of this universe. How come we didn't see a Green Lantern in Justice League? How come we didn't do, a Green Lantern? Well, Zack Snyder revealed later on, so he made his director's cut of the movie, which was almost 4 hours long, and released that later on, and people thought that Green Lantern was going to be in it because that was one of the things that he had talked about. He had actually shot a scene at the end of the movie that did feature Green Lantern because he wanted to make these Justice League movies, and in the next Justice League movie, the Lantern Corps was going to be a big, big part when they were fighting Darkseid. They were going to bring in the whole Green Lantern Corps, and it was going to be a big deal. But there's not going to be any more Justice League movies because the movie flopped, because it was edited so badly by Joss Whedon and the producers that nobody liked it. They made all these awesome movies leading up to it, and now they're making all these side character movies. Like I said, they're making Aquaman, Aquaman 2, Wonder Woman, Wonder Woman 2, all this kind of stuff, The Flash and all this kind of stuff. But they're not going to make another Justice League movie because, again, they are following the money, and the money just wasn't there for this Justice League movie because they edited it so much it was terrible. It wasn't terrible, it wasn't a good story. But originally, in the Zack Snyder version of the movie, Green Lantern shows up at the end, and it's Jon Stewart's Green Lantern. And he shows up at the end to say some stuff and talk to Batman and stuff like that. But whenever Zack Snyder was given the opportunity to release Zack Snyder's Justice League, the 4-hour version, he was going to have those scenes, which were already shot in the movie, and the studios came forward and were like, hey, you can't use the Green Lantern, you can't use John Stewart. And he's like, why? Green Lantern is a huge part of the plan for this movie and that movie itself. And they were like, well, we have plans for John Stewart in the future, so you can't. And he fought them, and they're like, nope, you can't use him, we have plans for him in the future. So he replaced him with the character the Martian Manhunter, which was also a huge part of the Justice League, but that's why there were no Green Lanterns in the Justice League. And they basically replaced Green Lantern's spot on the team with Cyborg. And people were really kind of pissed off because they were like, basically, you guys just totally got rid of the Green Lantern and you put in a character who was from like the teen superheroes, the Teen Titans, into the Justice League. You like brought him forward into the Justice League. And people were like, that's silly because, quite honestly, and I agree with them, Cyborg is a silly character. I never, he is exactly what he should be, which is a teen character, a teen superhero guy. Because he's a cyborg. That's it. That's his scenario. That's his cool superpower, is he's a half robot. That's not that interesting. We've had cyborgs in every sci-fi genre thing you can possibly imagine. So he was never that interesting. And to replace a character like the Green Lantern was really upsetting, and it was kind of pissed people off. But the main reason they chose to use Cyborg as that character is because they never had a plan to put the Green Lantern in the movie because, like I said, studios follow the money, and after the flop in 2011, they were like, no, we're good. We don't want to do any more Green Lantern stuff, so put somebody else. Anybody else you want to put in there, go ahead. And he chose Cyborg also because it had a lot to do with the cubes and that storyline. It made that storyline flow a little bit better. So it's fine to put Cyborg in there. It's not really, again, I don't really like that character that much, but I would have much rather liked to see a Green Lantern. So now the question is, will there be a future Green Lantern movie? That's the question. Because, like I said, when Zack Snyder was going to put those scenes in there, the studios said, no, we have plans for John Stewart. You can't put John Stewart in this movie because we have plans for John Stewart. So theoretically, that means that they have, the word on the street, if you will, is that they have a future plan for a Green Lantern core movie featuring the characters Hal Jordan and John Stewart. Now, it would be fantastic. John Stewart would make a great Green Lantern if you're going to make him into the movie. Like I said, if you were going to make a Green Lantern movie, he's the character you want to use because he's the one that's a serious superhero character. Like, you're turning all these guys serious. Like I said, Aquaman, super cheesy, and then you gave Jason Momoa the role, and bam, it made it serious and, like, awesome. Like, yeah, I get behind that dude. So, if you do a John Stewart and you get some awesome actor, not a cheesy, just grab somebody off the street actor, but like a really hardcore, awesome black guy actor to play that role, it would make an awesome movie. And I would seriously love to see it. So I hope something will happen with that. But to this day, there has been no word from the studios on any projects other than there might be something in the works. But there's no grounds being laid. Nobody's heard anything. Nobody's being hired. So who knows when that'll be. If I had to see somebody in the role, though, I tell you what, I know it's cliche, but Idris Elba, man, he's got to be the one. If you can get him to do an American accent, Idris Elba all the way. He is the guy it's all in the face. And it's just he's so serious. I would love to see him in that role. He would be my 100% choice. Idris Elba as John Stewart in the Green Lantern. Oh man, and that would be so good. I think he would do a phenomenal job because he's a great actor. And he looks so serious all the time. It would be perfect. It's funny. I used to actually have a joke when it comes to the Green Lantern movie that happened in 2011, which was, my joke was that Ryan Reynolds was a comic book nerd because he liked comic books. He's one of the only reasons the Deadpool movie got made, because he originally played Wade Wilson in X-Men Origins, and it was, again, the way movies are made, there were so many rewrites and things at the end of that movie that they butchered his character of Wade Wilson and totally made Deadpool a weird character in the end of that X-Men Origins movie, Wolverine movie. And he hated it so much that he put forth a lot of his own money and effort to get a Deadpool movie made. and because he was a comic book guy, he liked comic books, and I think that's part of the reasons why he originally took the Hal Jordan character, the Green Lantern character role. But I had a joke back in the day that I used to say, which was that he was a comic book fan, so he probably purposely did such a bad job. He made the Green Lantern movie such a bad job because they really, really wanted to just make sure we could kick out Hal Jordan pretty quick and bring in the real Green Lantern, John Stewart. That was my old joke. I was like, oh, he probably did this on purpose so that, we could get the real Green Lantern, John Stewart. Because this is the other thing, too. I want people to realize that John Stewart was the best Green Lantern for a number of reasons, but it's also really important to have, look at all the superheroes out there. Now, I know this is cliche for a white guy to be talking about or whatever, but how many of them are black, guys? How many of them are ethnic in any way, shape, or form? They're not. They're all whitewashed because that's what people wanted to see when they were created. Everything was whitewashed back then. This was the 40s and 50s and 60s when this stuff was created. So you end up with a blonde-haired, blue-eyed superhero. And that's just not, it's not realistic. And black people, I grew up with a lot of black guys who didn't have any comic book heroes. So when John Stewart was the Green Lantern, he was like the best role model superhero character for these young guys, like these nerd guys that I grew up. Everybody loved John Stewart's Green Lantern because he wasn't a cheesy sidekick that happened to be black, or a Luke Cage guy that was basically just a stereotype of African American guys in the 70s. He was a badass, awesome superhero that could do all sorts of crazy stuff. He was just really, really cool. And I think it's important to give, now we have the Black Panther, who came out for the Marvel universe. That's a black superhero, and that character is great and amazing and wonderful. But again, they had to go super, super, he was from Africa, and the character's from Africa, and that's his whole thing. But they had to go super that way, super crazy African culture and super crazy this. What about just a regular black American guy? John Stewart was an architect. The character John Stewart was an architect. He was just a regular black guy who went through some crazy stuff, and now he's a superhero. And we don't have one of those characters, which we have for every other superhero when it comes to white people, but we don't have one for black guys. And I think we really, really could use John Stewart's Green Lantern. I think that would be awesome. I would love to see it. Like a serious Green Lantern. Not a cheesy, funny, laughable, blah, 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 but a serious one. I want to see that in the films. So I just rambled a whole lot about all this silliness. I hope I didn't show too much of my nerd, but there you go, man. I think that kind of covers it. So that's why the reason we haven't seen Green Lantern in the films so far yet is because studios are biased and they follow money. And even though the 2011 movie wasn't terrible necessarily, it wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. It didn't make a lot of money for them. I think it just about evened out, or somewhere around it cost about $200 million to make. I think they may have made about $220 million in the end. It is probably making a lot of money now in syndication. Like I said, Netflix has it as one of the top rented movies, which is surprising, but it is making money now. But for producers and for the production companies themselves, the studios didn't see a lot of return on that movie, so they just didn't want to continue with the character, which is really sad because the character is really cool. So I hope in the future they bring something forward, but that's where we're at with the Green Lantern as of now. So this has been a fun one to get out of our normal little serious conversations all the time. But yeah, that's going to be it for this one. I have been your host, Nicholas John Random, and we are once again live at the Stimulus Cafe and Coffee House in Durango, Colorado. If you ever want to stop in for a delicious cup of coffee, come on in. I might be here. You might be able to get your question answered in person. If you like our podcast, click those buttons down there at the bottom, guys. Click the like button, the subscribe button. If you feel like checking us out over on Facebook, we are at facebook.com/Random Radio Podcast. We're also on Patreon if you feel like you want to support us and help us keep the lights on a little bit, some better mics and things like that in the future. Patreon.com/Random Radio. If you got a question for me and you want me to do a podcast on your question, send all your questions to random@cafestimulus.com. Send me a question any way you can, guys. I love all the good questions. And as you can see by this one, it's not all serious stuff. This one was a silly one about comic books. It's just anything you want to know about. And I might know a little bit about it too, and we can have a little conversation. So, thanks for joining us on this one, guys. And until next time, we will see you on the next episode of Just Ask.